Hey folks, thanks for tuning in. Welcome to Free Lesson Friday. Come back every Friday for free content like this on a variety of different topics surrounding your piano playing, all based on the stuff that I teach in my various courses over at the pianomanapproach.com, pianomanapproach.com. But anyway, I am Piano Man Steve, and today we are going to be talking about voicing complex chords. A lot of people are not quite sure what to do when you get beyond that basic triad, when you get beyond the major, the minor, the augmented, the diminished. Maybe they feel okay when you have a 7 chord, but after that they just get a little confused because there's so many notes that make up the chord, and they're like, gosh, I don't have enough fingers to do it all, and it's not practical. Even if I do have enough fingers to play every note in the chord, it's not practical to do so. So how do we go about voicing these monster chords like your 13s and your sharp 11s and your sharp 9s and your flatted 9s and various things like that? Well, that's what we're going to talk about, because there is, in fact, a pretty darn easy formula that you can apply that will not only tell you what you need to play in each one of these chords, but it'll kind of guide you as the best way to voice them, the best way to actually apply them on the piano. So they kind of dictate it, because once you get to these really complex chords, even though there are a lot of different inversions that you could use, I'm going to show you in this video why a lot of times there's really only one or two particularly good ways to voice more complex ones. So we're going to get into all of that, and we're going to start here. We're just going to kind of look in the key of C at first, because I just want to, mostly what I want to do is talk concept, and I want to teach you this formula that you can apply in any key to any complex chord. Okay? So this is kind of the easiest place to start demonstrating from. And what I want to start out with is, let's go to a 9 chord. So we all know that if you have a major chord, okay, and if you don't know this, then you're not ready for this video, and that's okay. But you'll want to know a little more about chords than you currently do to watch this one if you're not familiar with what a major chord is. So we always start at the Piano Man approach from an octave bass with our root notes. That would be C, okay? And then we know that a major chord would be C, E, G, right? 1, 3, 5. There's your major triad. Okay, works pretty well. Now, the next thing that you might see is C7. And when you go to a C7 chord, we're going to add in that dominant 7, which in this case ends up being a B flat. And it doesn't matter, it could be a major 7, it could be the B natural, but we're adding a 7 in. Still works pretty well, and what you'll find once you get as far as a 7 chord is that all of the different inversions of your chord work pretty well for voicing. You can play it here, you can play it here, you can play it here, you can play it here. You know, they all sound pretty good, because the reason why the inversions all work really well when you're in simple triads and even into your dominant, minor, or major 7s is because the spacing between the notes is fairly consistent. You mostly have some kind of a third, either a minor third or a major third in distance between the notes. And then in one case, you're going to have possibly either a minor or a major second between the chords, or between the notes. So like from B flat to C. But by and large, there's enough space between the notes that it kind of works. Okay? So now, what happens when we add a 9 in? Well, first of all, what is a 9? Or an 11 or a 13? Well, if you're unfamiliar with that, a 9 is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That is where you should start over again at 1 on your scale degrees. except if you think of it as 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. So what you're thinking of here is it's a ninth up from where you started. And you could say, well, why don't they just call it a 2 chord? 1, 2. And here's the rub. When you have your chord name, like C, and then next to it you have a number, like 2 or 6 or 7 or 9, if it's below 7, they assume, they're telling you that you play the triad plus that scale degree. So it would simply be like a 6 chord would simply be 1, 2, 1, 3, 5, 6. But if it's a 13 chord, they're expecting all of the other stuff underneath it. So it would be 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, 11, 13, which is where we get into these voicing problems, because who in the world has enough fingers to go? And it sounds awful. That's as good as you can make a 13 chord sound on the piano if you play all of the notes, and it sounds terrible. And it's just not very practical to do when you're playing in a song. So that's the problem. So when we get to a 9, we now have to make some choices. What are we going to include? So here's the formula that I want you to use for all complex chords from 9 all the way up to 13. Okay? And this regardless of whether it's sharped or flatted or whatever. You want to play root, 3, 7, and the highest identified scale degree in the chord name. Okay? So what would that mean? That would mean you play the root, the 3, the 7, and the 9 in this case. Okay, so here's our root. We've already got it covered in the left hand. It's a C. What's the 3? It's that E right there. 1, 2, 3. The 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And then the 9. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And there is our 9 chord. Right there. It gives you everything that you need. Now, why is this formula important? You can play other notes in the chord besides those. But let's talk about why those steps are so vital and why they're the ones that you have to keep in mind and why you want to hit them on every single chord. It's because, obviously, the root of the chord tells you it's a C chord, right? Okay? The 3 tells you whether this is a major or a minor chord. Very, very important information, right? Because this, a C major chord, sounds a lot different from this, a C minor chord, okay? So we want to tell people whether this is a major or a minor chord. That's where your 3 comes in. So it's a major chord. Now, the 7, the reason why we put the 7 in there is that that's what makes this a 9 instead of a 2 chord. Okay? Because this is your 2nd scale degree. It's also your 9th scale degree. Right? So a C2 would simply be this. 1, 3, 5 with the 2. Sometimes they even call that added 9. And all they mean by that is we're adding that in without having to put the other stuff in, without having to put the 7 in. That's all they mean when they put that. But that's your C2. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, 5. But that is not the sound we're looking for. That sounds a lot different from this. Right? So that dominant 9 chord needs the 7 to distinguish itself from a C2 chord. Beg your pardon? Just coming off of a little respiratory infection there, and it's got me a little dehydrated. But anyway, so that's the key. The 7 is what makes it a 9 chord or an 11 chord or a 13 chord instead of a suspended chord or in place of an 11, or a 6 chord instead of a 13, or as we just discussed, a 2 chord instead of a 9. So we got to tell them that it is a major or a minor chord. We got to tell them that it's a complex chord, so we put the 7 in, and then whatever that highest identified scale degree is. So in this case, the highest scale degree identified in the chord name is 9. So we put that in there. That's your essential. Now, since you might have, in this particular instance, a free finger, you could throw the 5 in. That's fine. It just thickens the chord, but it isn't necessary. Sounds fine. When you have a free finger that you could set down easily on a chord, the question you want to ask yourself is how densely populated are the notes. In this case, you got like, that one's about a third, some kind of a third apart from this one, so it's like a minor third. And that's a minor third away from here. That's a major third away from here. There's plenty of space between those notes, right? So it's fine to thicken it up because there's space. But if you were in a situation where you try to play it in a different inversion and you end up with like that, it works okay, but see how it's not as effective of a voicing? It's because there's not very much space between those two notes. So the chord feels a little squished together, a little cramped. And that's kind of what we're looking for. When you get into complex chords, you want the notes to be spaced out a little bit. And sometimes your left hand can help you out. But in a lot of cases, when you're playing popular music like I do, my left hand needs to be focused more on playing a rhythm pattern. And quite often that is some form of octave play. Occasionally I can be using the 5 or something in my left hand, but really my left hand is down here kind of acting as a bass guitar and a drum set, and it's not of a great deal of utility to me harmonically, whereas if I'm playing in a group perhaps and I'm just comping, then I could play some of the chords like this and be like, right? But that doesn't do me a lot of good when I'm playing piano by myself and I'm kind of trying to replicate the sound of a band all on one instrument. So that's what we want to do, is we just always want to know what are those key notes. So let's take this analogy a little further. That's the 9 chord. Let's say that it was a sharped 11 chord. A pure 11 chord is kind of unusual. You don't see it that often. Most people will just instead choose to do like a suspended chord or a suspended 7, which gives you a very, very similar sound, only less annoying, less dissonance. But sharped 11 you will see every once in a while. So what does it mean? Well, so we start on C. We have a C major chord, C, E, G, right? And then you have your 7, your 9, and then here's your 11. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and we sharp it. Okay? Very, very distinct sound. You're not going to see a ton of these out there, but when you do, these are the kinds of chords you really want to be able to hit because they have a very distinct sound and they were put in place for a very distinct reason. So it's nice to be able to hit them, right? Well, that is definitely a handful of notes. So now let's unpack it and make it practical to play and not lose what makes the chord sound like itself, right? So what do we want to do? Root, 3, 7. Now, we go to the highest scale degree and we get the sharped 11, and it's like, well, that's not a great way to, that can't be great because most people can't even stretch their hand that far. I'm lucky. I've got kind of like Michael Jordan hands. They're huge. So what makes the most sense here? Well, now what we're going to do is create sort of a little bit of an inversion using those notes. So what we're going to do is, let's try putting the 3 on top. And then down below that, here's the 7. And here's that sharp 11. That's one way that you can do it. You could also try it like this. You could say, all right, we're not going to have as much space between the notes, but let's try here. And by doing that, maybe you give yourself a little bit of room because you've got a finger here that could come down on the 9. So you have options. You have options. But the key is you want to, when you practice these chords, you want to get used to what's the voicing that makes the most sense. What do I like the sound of and what works for my hand? And sometimes you're going to have more than one choice, but I would have a go-to voicing for really complex chords that you can just kind of go to comfortably. And then you can practice voicing it in all 12 keys that way. But it's kind of hard on the fly to make sure that you hit every note that you need to hit unless you have got somewhat of a strategic plan for these really, really complex chords. So with a sharp 11 chord, we just want to make sure that we're letting people know it is a major chord and it's got a 7. So it's a complex chord and the complex note is this one. Or that's another way to do it. 7, 3, 11. And that gives you all of the qualities that you need for that chord to be conveyed. Okay? If you have room to put the 5 or the 9 in, great. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with doing that. But they're not essential. You would never, ever want to sacrifice the 3 or the 7 for the 5 or the 9. Why is that? That 5, which is G, does not tell you whether this C chord is a major chord or a minor chord. Doesn't give you that information. So it doesn't really tell you anything that you need to know about the chord. All it does is thicken the chord. So that one is expendable. Got to have the 3. And if you leave out the 7 and you put in the 9, right? It's missing a key component. It sounds more like you're just playing like a D chord over a C chord or over a C bass. It doesn't sound like you're playing a C sharp 11 because without that dominant 7 in there tying it together, you can't hear that it's actually a C complex chord. So man, that's a creepy chord, but I like it. I like it a lot. It sounds like we're in a Star Wars movie and the Empire is pulling in and it sounds imminent that they're going to attack. Okay. Finally, let's take a look at 13 chords, which is the other kind of popular one, more popular one. What are we doing here? Well, we want to follow the same formula. What's a 13? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Okay? Same as your 6, right? Except we have to apply the formula. So root, right? And then 3, that's your E. And then we've got to put in the 7. And then we got to make sure the 13 is in there. Okay, now this is a terrible voicing of it, and we're going to fix that, but there's our 3 notes that have to be in there. So we look and we say, how best to voice that one? Well, to my view, the best way, and really the only way to voice a 13 chord that I think sounds worth a darn if you're following this formula is to put the 7 on the bottom, put the 3 in the middle, and then put the 13 up here. Beautiful, wide open, spacey voicing right there. Everything that you've got to have in there so that people know it's a 13. You'd never mistake this for a 6 chord. No, there's something special about it. And you know that it's a major chord. If you take that E out of there, it's okay, but that's one of my favorite chords ever. If you play any amount of jazz or swing music, you're going to see that pop up quite a bit, and it's good stuff. And it's like I say, these complex chords, you don't see them a ton in pop music, in rock, pop, country. But when they do show up, it's really great to be able to actually play them because they have such distinct sounds that you really don't want to miss out on them. They were put there for a reason. But it's just not practical to play it any other way. There's no good way to play a 6 chord if the way you have to do it is to go. And like I say, it sounds like crap anyway when you do that. It's just too cluttered. And so in order to give it space, get those nice fat octaves down here. And there's your 7, there's your 3, there's your 13. You got root, 3, 7, and the highest identified scale degree in the chord name. Boom, there's your 13 chord. So that's how I navigate complex chords, and it's really, really served me well. It doesn't mean that you can't play more notes than that if you have a free finger and there's one laying around. But what I think as you experiment with this, you're going to find repeatedly is, boy, it sure sounds better when the notes that you play have adequate space between them. And sometimes, in fact, a lot of times, less is more. So 4 really well-placed notes can sound so much fuller and so much crisper and cleaner and with the clarity of what you're trying to accomplish, and just sound so much nicer than 5 or 6 notes, even though you're playing a more technically and theoretically full version of the chord that way. So that's what I think is important. Practicality in this case actually leads to a better sound, but you got to know which ones to include and you got to know why. And there's your formula. Root, 3rd, 7, and the highest identified scale degree in the chord name. And I've put that formula down in the description for you, in the video description, so that you can see it written down as a reference as well. But you can apply that to any chord more complex than a 7, and you are well on your way to finding a great voicing and something that you can practice and get yourself prepared for so that when you see it come up when you're reading chord sheets, either whether they're just with lyrics or if it's a lead sheet where you've got maybe a melody notated, like in a fake book or wherever. But when you see it, you're prepared to play that chord and jump right to the voicing that works best for it. So it not only sounds the best, but because you have a plan and because you've kind of practiced and worked your way around it, you can jump right to it and you don't miss out on all of the fun nuance and complexity and character that chord has to offer that moment in that particular song. So I'm going to leave you there for today. I hope that this has been somewhat enlightening because this is the kind of thing that used to drive me kind of crazy, and I kind of had to figure this out through trial and error myself. So I'm hopeful that this is giving you some insight that will help you apply complex chords into your piano playing with more ease, more success, and a more satisfying outcome, both auditorily and in just the feel of it and the application of it with your hands. So please check out the goods down in my video description for ways to support the channel and some free goodies that I've got available for you at my website and all that kind of stuff. It's all down there. Check it out. And check us out over at pianomanapproach.com. I appreciate it very much, guys. Remember, if you're not having fun when you're making music, you're doing it wrong, and I'll see you on the next Free Lesson Friday. Bye-bye.